Yeah, I see people starting to trickle in already. What's up, everybody? And yeah, once we hit the top of the hour, then
Oh, yeah.
I'll
Okay.
sing a song probably.
And
I might actually. Where's my
uh,
ukulele?
and sorry, I should have told me this, but like, of course you can feel free, but are you going to jump in and like ask questions or move things around, or should we just have you'll kind of, I'll drive, but you'll interject wherever you need to, I guess.
Yeah,
Right.
taking requests over here.
What's the crowd favorite?
Um, let's see. I have one that I've been working on for a while. It's called Balancing Growth and Profitability.
It's a catchy title. I think I think I saw that on like Rap Genius or something.
I was just gonna rip one, but this thing is so out of tune. I'm like, oh, it's gonna be bad if I do that.
It's like the annotated Rap Genius version of it. Like, oh, this is what it really means. Who's that the diss track against?
I do like to improvise a good song, but honestly, it's so out of tune. If I do that, I'm gonna ruin everybody's A+ experience of my ukulele freestyles. So it was gonna be good though. I was gonna rhyme profitability with some good stuff. Oh my gosh, everybody.
The one thing ChatGPT is good for. You're like, find 5 words that rhyme with profitability.
All right. Let's see. All right, what's up, everybody? I see people starting to flood in here. Um, cool. So I've opened up the chat for everybody. So if you want, you could post a message that just says who you are, where you're calling in from, what your brand is, um, and also any specific questions you have. I would love. Like we have a Q&A here, but you can also just drop it into the chat, which is kind of nice. And the one thing is make sure when you send a message in the chat, you have to click this silly drop down that says to and do everyone so that everybody gets to see your lovely message, not just only a few people or the hosts and panelists. So check everyone if you send it. But yeah, definitely tell us what your brand is and what kind of questions you have. This is so thank you to the High Beam team for joining us for this topic. It's a big issue, right? Balancing growth and profitability. For me, I feel like every VC that I know now, they will tell you as a brand as if they are the first person who's ever thought of this. Like it's really important for you to be profitable. But it's not so clear cut, right? Because okay, maybe you have a little bit of funding and you're not going to be profitable on your first tiny run that you're doing somewhere. And you just need to actually like spend a certain amount of money to refine your messaging and like see how this thing is going to go and get you to the next fundraise. Like that might be one thing. Or it might just not be the best advice for where you are and where you're trying to get to. So I think there are a lot of nuances. I'm really happy to have a discussion about this, about balancing the two, growth and profitability, because if you just focus on profitability, you're never going to get the growth to where you could actually have a straight cash profitable business. You just might have a on paper percentage-wise profitable business. So thank you a lot. We've got Samir and Alan joining here just to talk about their experiences in it. And yeah, definitely keep the questions coming in the chat. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Samir from High Beam to introduce himself and the topic.
Thank you so much. And yeah, thanks for having us. And a topic that's near and dear to my heart, actually, this kind of tension between growth and profitability. And I think to your point, I'll do introduction in a second. I think it's really pertinent in this time where we had this kind of low interest rate environment where it was almost this grow at all costs, that was became the kind of norm. And I think there's been this reset to reality, and it's really hard for operators and brands to figure out like how do we manage this growth and profitability in the context of high interest rates, in the context of, to your point, which I think is a really good one, that the businesses that we're in are working capital intensive. You have to spend on inventory and marketing to grow. So you have to balance that and actually invest in it to make things happen. So anyways, without further ado, let me jump in. And again, we'd love to keep this as interactive as possible. So please, any questions people have, we're happy to pause, answer, kind of make sure it's as valuable as possible. A bit about myself, Samir, I'm the CEO and co-founder of HighBeam. HighBeam, for those of you that don't know, is a banking and cash management platform for consumer brands. So what we try to do is we partner with growth consumer brands to provide a few things. One is operating banking, but almost more importantly, on top of that, the cash planning tools and the ability to really manage your cash more effectively. We've had the privilege of working with Alan, who's one of the most successful operators I know on Moon Brew. So I'll let him introduce himself. But we thought for this webinar, rather than me talking about what HighBeam does, it'd be really useful to hear from Alan as a successful operator on what's worked for him and his lessons in scaling a brand. So I'll stop talking and let Alan introduce himself, and then we'll go on from there.
Absolutely. Hey, what's going on, everybody? Alan Shen, co-founder and CEO at Moon Brew. We are the strongest magnesium nighttime sleep aid. We've since sold 13 million servings across the USA. And, back to your point earlier, Samir, we've had the blessing of being in both the ZERP economy and the post-ZERP economy. So, we play both sides of the playbook a little bit.
Excellent. And yeah, so I'm really excited to get some discussion from Alan on the reality of what it takes to grow and balance growth and profitability. And I think from my perspective, Alan and his team are some of the smartest, savviest operators that I know in terms of really being in the details and understanding what it takes to do this. So please ask questions. And as we go forward, we can hopefully get some reality and flavor of like what it takes to build these businesses. So actually, real quickly, I already mentioned this on HighBeam, but we were founded in 2021. We have 200 plus customers, and a large amount of customers that we work with are probably in the, I'd say $5 million to $75 million of sales range, because that's where a lot of times the real pain points of the growth and scale comes into play. But we also deal with brands less than that. And so at the end, I'll talk a bit about how we partner with brands who are smaller and, ambitious founders that are trying to kind of grow and scale their brand. So quickly, what we'll try to cover is strategic growth planning, balancing profit and expansion, how to think about investment and resource allocation, and hopefully some tips at the end that are like actually tangible that you can use to go and implement today. So hopefully bringing some reality to like, what is it that you should do tomorrow to get a better handle on balancing growth and profitability? So, this won't come as news to anyone, but like, why balance growth and profitability? I think there's a number of reasons we've already touched on, but just quickly, market volatility is important because, to the earlier point, it's at different times, the market will reward you for different things. At some point, someone might tell you in VC land or investor land, well, all we care about is growth, and it's your top line number that matters. Or they might come back and say, like, wait a minute, just kidding. We looked outside and now the weather is bad and we think it's profitability. And so you'll get whiplashed because you can't change your business back and forth from like 6 months to say, oh, we're focused on growth or we're focused on profitability. It just doesn't work that way. So you have to kind of manage expectations to ride this market volatility. Second, long-term vision. Like at the end of the day, the way I put it is sales is a vanity metric and it's an important metric, but what matters is profitability and cash flow. That's what's going to fund your business and pay your business and make you sustainable. So you have to balance that and make the right decisions right from the start. And then lastly, sustainable growth. So at the end of the day, people invest in businesses so that you come out the other side and you have like the self-funding engine to drive profitability and growth. And that's the end state. And that's more and more important. And what we found is it's more and more important earlier on in the life cycle. So I believe that even for inception stage or early stage businesses, if you're not thinking about profitability and growth as the balancing act, it's something you're probably leaving something on the table with regards to that. So let me go to the next slide, then I'll bring Alan actually in for his perspective, if that works. So,
yeah, and I was just going to add on to that also,
please.
like it does depend at this stage, right? Because early on, like maybe you're raising, but it's from angel investors. They may not have tons of experience in the space. They may not have heard all the chatter about profitability and know to just ask you that one question, right? They might just actually be much more excited about your early traction. So that's why it's always a balance. Like it depends on who you're talking to, what's your goal with the business, what stage are you at, what's your future plan for growth and how much you're going to raise. So I love the idea about like having the overall plan at least and thinking about it early on, even if you're maybe like, flexing how much you're stressing one versus the other.
And maybe, Ellen, that's a good segue to bring in a little bit of your experience from the start of the business, how you thought about these things and what maybe has changed as you mentioned, as you've gone from like a ZERP economy to a non-ZERP economy.
Absolutely. So when we first started the business, my co-founder and I, we launched September 2021, right on the tails of IDFA, iOS 14, and Zert money was still in the economy. And so from that perspective, I mean, I think we were
Can
growing
we
at
can we define ZERP again? I don't know if I
True,
missed it, but
interest-rate
for
policy. So, I mean, the feds were just handing out money left and right for free. And so that money had to go somewhere. And so a lot of deployment just went downstream in the sense that capital was easy to get. I think, at that time when we were talking to working capital providers, everyone was quick to essentially give us lines of credit and things like that, which didn't necessarily set up the stage quite well for a lot of brands and companies, especially the ones with poor financial literacy going forward. And so when the interest rates started raising, we had to essentially think about it like from the beginning, we were focused on top line growth. We were focused on so many different things. And, as entrepreneurs, a lot of us are creatives, but we're also juggling a million things per day. And one of the easier things, just because of all these dashboards that are available to you, it's easy to forget to be mindful of your metrics that matter. And to just look at the Shopify dashboard and be like, ooh, sales, like this looks great. And so I think like post Zer Economy, I think for us, when we're kind of looking into, how do we want to build the business? It's exactly what you guys mentioned earlier, right? It's like working backwards. We look from a top-down perspective of understanding what type of business do we want to build? What is our strategy and plan going forward? Do we see an exit in the future? Is this something that will cash flow all the time? And based off of that, work backwards. So I think in a nutshell, that's kind of how we look at it today. It's like, what is the long-term potential of the business? What are the working capital needs that we need to have in order to keep this growth going to balance cash flow? And what types of partnerships do we need and what metrics may they be looking for so that we can kind of essentially put it all together and be able to keep snowballing towards our progress?
Yeah, and just to jump in there, I think Alan mentioned a couple of things that are super important here. And why is it that for brands specifically, this is so important and consumer goods? Because I think consumer goods uniquely, or not uniquely, but very much so compared to other businesses, are working capital intensive, that you have to buy inventory or spend on marketing ahead of sales. So as you grow the business, you actually have to put more capital into the business to grow the business because you have to spend more on inventory and marketing. So right from day one, you have to fund working capital, and the growth means you have to find more sources of funds to push into the business. So it's almost like the more successful you are and the quicker the rise, the more capital you have to push into the business. And that's a challenge, even for the best operators like Alan, in terms of like managing that. But I think that's why it's important right from the start to have a process to manage not just the sales, because the sales hopefully will grow as the products you're so excited about launching and scaling. But how do you support that sales growth with the right structure around the cash planning and the capital? And that part sometimes gets overlooked. And that to me is really the right balancing act. And I think the key message for Alan there, which was really true, was there was a time where you could get the balance off and still kind of be okay because capital was cheap, interest rates were low. So you would find sources of funding to support the growth, but those days are kind of gone now. So now it's much more about finding a balance in terms of how much effort you spend kind of has shifted a little. And so maybe that was what you call there.
And I think also the plan is important, and it's not just for you to know what your plan is. It's like opportunities may come along, and if you can't actually communicate that plan to people, it may make you ineligible. I'll tell you, we run startup CPG giveaways all the time, but one of the things that some of the giveaway offers are going to look at is like, okay, if you win this thing and you're going to grow fast, do you have the money to actually support it? Because like Samir said, growth is expensive. It takes capital, right? And if you don't have like, yes, here is our plan, this is where it's going to come from already in mind, that, tough for them to have confidence. And then I think also it's easy to think about companies in this situation as just like you have $1 million in the bank and this is how you have to plan it. But like, I know a lot of you guys out there are funding the business yourself, and maybe it's your side hustle, or maybe you dove all in on it and it's your savings. And I think, it's really important to have a long-term and shorter-term plan for that as well. Like, okay, how long can I do that for? And what has to be true on sales and capital for me to be able to actually fund that? Or does it mean I need to keep this other job for long enough so I can fund it through that first 18 months until I can get to the point where I could fundraise? So what do you think, Samir? You probably have clients who are in the same situation who's this like balancing growth and profitability also extends to kind of their personal pocketbook.
Yeah, and a lot of brand founders we talk to is like they've put their own time and effort and money into obviously building and scaling this, and it's an important part of their life and their families and how they support their families, and they want to really invest in this. And I think that's why it's so important to do it responsibly, because it's your money and your business, right? And so it can be hard to do well, but it's important to do it because it's the only way in which you can be confident that you're trying to achieve the right balance and making the right use of funds to make the right decision. So I'll give you an example. You know, early on in your business, you don't really have that many great options for funding. It's just a reality of what it is. Then you graduate to maybe, okay, I'm getting a loan from, I don't know, Shopify or whoever it might be. And that's expensive money, right? But that's maybe the only options you have. And then you continue to get successful, there's more and more options open up, and hopefully over time. But it's almost the earliest stage is the toughest, because you have your own time, effort, and money you're putting in. You don't necessarily always have great funding options, because maybe you might have a good investor, you might have angel investors, but from a working capital standpoint, it can be quite difficult. And you're trying to balance it to get the engine going so you can get things off the ground. So that kind of $0 to $2 million of sales it's a tough place to be. And so that's really where having the discipline to set up a cash planning process that you can rely on, doing the basics, like I have a 13-week cash flow statement that I can go and plan against. And we'll talk a bit more about the tips that we've seen best in class do. I think it's important to start building that discipline so that you can show that to investors. You can show that to, people that would want to see that, and that you yourself can use that to manage the ongoing business.
And to
How does that?
piggyback on that, guys, I mean, I think like, the metrics that we primarily focus on when it deals with cash flow is like CAC to LTV, right? So a lot of businesses, I'm sure, are subscription based, or they're not first order profitable when they're acquiring on Meta. And so what that means is that you have to have strong confidence in your LTV metrics to be able to float your cash flow on one hand. On the other hand, on the inventory side, we deal with long lead times. I'm sure a lot of brands work with co-mans and things like that. Those are on average 8 to 12 weeks in terms of lead time. So it's being able to float both acquisition and inventory costs at the same time.
And then last thing I think that before we move on is I do think it's important for people to build a plan, imperfect as it might be, that they can try to use their planning on cash against. The reason I say that is because, a lot of people will try to hope for the best and look at their bank statement and say like, oh, I have this much cash, and, lurch from crisis to crisis almost. And I understand why, but if you can get out of that and actually try to build a plan and say like, look, I know I need to go and have this inventory run at this point, so I need to raise this much cash, and here's the plan to do that. And if I can't, here's the backup. Like that just gives you confidence and gives you something to run off of. So
That actually is also really helpful
so
when you're going out for like working capital partnership conversations. It's like, hey, like, things have been operating fairly well. We have a PO coming up. We need someone to help, fund this purchase order. I think that helps in terms of like working capital or fundraising.
right. So I realize it's 15 minutes and I haven't gone past slide one, so I will try to do a better job of moving forward and keeping myself honest. But I think the conversation is important. So I'll go through and stop on the next slide. I think that might be useful. So we've talked about this, I think, about why balancing growth and profitability is important. So I'm just going to go through this. But maybe, Alan, when it comes to actual tips that people can use, that you use during the actual planning from early on to set up the balance between growth and profitability. You talk a few about that, maybe?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like you just said earlier about, start with a plan as imperfect as it may be. It's very important, right? So I think the best tip I would say is like dive into your P&L, understand every cost center and how that plays into each other. And then prepare a forecast and a budget plan. As imperfect as it may be, our first forecast was 30% off month over month. So it was not near dialed in, but we got better at doing forecasting and budgeting after that. But from an operator's perspective, I would first start with team alignment, right? So I think the most important functions that you want to align on are marketing, operations, and finance. From a marketing perspective, it's, you want to know how true are these metrics as far as like how much I'm willing to spend per month, where my CAC targets are going to be, and where my retention number is going to be. From an operational perspective, they're worried about inventory and making sure the stocks are shelved, or the shelves are stocked, and that you're able to essentially keep everything moving and also have enough cash. And that's where the finance piece comes in. Once we're aligned on those metrics, that's when we start looking at like cost centers, right? So like if you're thinking about it from a forecasting perspective, it's like, what are your inputs first? Your inputs are how much you're going to spend, what your CACs are going to be, how much returning customers you're going to have. Once you have those, start digging into the costs. And from a marketing heavy company like us, we focus a lot on agencies and apps. And I think the number one kind of tip over there is like it's easy in today's market. You go on the Shopify app ecosystem, there's a million apps for anything and everything. Have a very clear why as to you're investing in these platforms and have the right focus over there. And then the last piece, as far as like strategic growth planning, is a scenario plan. So for us, it's like, when we're hitting our marketing metrics and we need to exceed past plan, we'll run many scenarios to make sure that number one, we have the cash for it. But most importantly, like we have enough inventory to cover the sales that we're going to generate. So I think go with team alignment, make sure all the stakeholders over there are bought into kind of the mission and where you guys want to go together. From there, take a look at all the cost centers together, figure out how to essentially fund by having stronger marketing efficiency or things like that. And then lastly, scenario plan when things are at plan or if you're looking to exceed over plan.
And I'll just add in so in my last role as a very retail focused brand, the biggest benefits or savings for us on cash were basically not getting into accounts that we thought we would get into. When it went slower, then it's like, all right, we don't have all of that slotting expense right now, and we don't have all of the inventory expense. And sometimes you're like, good, yeah, let's hold that for a little bit longer as we figure out our plan. But then the other thing, the biggest impact on that we did not predict for was around operations, because it's not just like, oh, your COGS and everyday stuff. It was all the shit that went so wrong. And all of a sudden you're like, gosh, you have to throw out tons of inventory, or you have to replace ingredients or do another run or something that you weren't anticipating. So it's not just having the perfect plan. If I sell here and then we go here, but then I think also having a big buffer for stuff will go wrong. That's the one thing you can guarantee, is that things will go wrong. You probably found that too, Alan, that you had unexpected ops expenses.
Yeah, I mean, legal expenses, certain contractors, they pop up here and there. And so, I think the guiding principle for us has always been the forecast. It's like, if it's not on the forecast or the budget plan, we're going to have a deep conversation and scenario plan it out before we move forward. But that also, enables you to help you spot opportunities too, right? So like when marketing metrics are exceeding plan, we're acquiring at really good CACs. That's when we start looking into essentially like competitors and like where can we fit within the marketplace with new product launches. It helps us spot opportunity by just having a deep understanding into our financial metrics.
The legal one gave me shivers again, just remembering those are my least favorite expenses, I think.
And I was just noticing on some of the chat, I think a lot of people are obviously like also product launch, pre-product launch, thinking about how to get funding and some of the pros and cons. I think one piece of advice that I hold to be true is that, especially early on in the business, most people worry about sales, right? All they care about is sales. Like, am I growing? What am I doing? How's my sales after I launch? Then they might think about profits and they're like, oh, am I EBITDA positive? Am I profitable? All these things. And then they think about cash third, and they think about cash in terms of like how much of my bank account, how much I have to raise. I would almost flip that and say like sales are important, but like the most important thing early on you can do is cash planning. And this is true for almost up till $1 million of sales. You should run your business on a cash plan, and accounting and accrual based on EBITDA and all that stuff is important. But what will kill your business or help your business grow is really, at the end of the day, can you pay your bills, pay inventory, pay marketing on a schedule that works for you, that is sustainable. So setting up, to Alan's point, a system that's usable, that has a cash plan, that shows you your forecast and outlays, that may be imperfect, may change, but you have something that you're working with. I think the people that we see that do that, one, it helps with funding because people will ask for that. And the best investors know that everything else is kind of like guesswork, but that's your plan for the next 3 months. So if you have a 13-week cash flow statement that actually shows your inflows and outflows that you're confident on, that you can use to operate the business, that gives people confidence that it's a reason to invest. And so for a large part, I think that that's worth doing and standing up. And then almost worry about that more than you do about profitability or even sales early on.
Yeah, we started off with a 13-week cash flow model, and we actually, it's like the operating system of our business. And so we converted that to a 52-week cash flow model just to have a more granular view from a week by week basis, especially as our retention curve kind of plays into it all. And so that allows us to have a really good view on the business. But we use it in terms of like inventory planning, just to understand our cash positions, how much working capital we might need, in 6 months, to essentially keep the business pushing at this rate. And, whenever we dip into the red, we're like, okay, marketing, you have to slow down. This 5% week over week growth is good, but don't exceed over 10 because it will send us into the red. And so it's all very helpful, and we view it as an operating system for the business.
And just one question then, because probably a lot of people are like, okay, I get it. I need that cash flow thing. I don't know how to do that. What are scrappy ways to do that? You think they're just like Excel templates, or does everyone need to go and like hire a bookkeeper to put that thing together for them if they like, even if they just want the bare minimum?
You could definitely find a template online. I'll let Samir speak to it a little bit more. I'm sure he has a template that you could share, but there's a template that you can find online, and it all starts with your inputs, your expenses. Our cash flow model has like 30 different sheets inside with different types of inputs, from retention curves to ad spend, CACs and AOVs and things like that, which flows into a bunch of different other things like inventory planning.
I think that, there's a lot of great templates out there, and I think that the trick is, and maybe we can share one afterwards as well, the one that we prefer, but it's almost a matter of like which one is the one that you're actually going to use, and my advice there is don't go for something that Alan would use today at his stage of the business, because you'll never keep it up to date or track it that way. Keep something pretty simple early on, and then as you get better at it, you'll kind of add on things. For example, at Highbeam, one thing we do for most of our customers as they scale is like we'll generate the 13-week cash flow forecast for them, like a baseline version that they can choose to use that comes out of the box with using Highbeam. So we will build that in and keep it live and current, because the best model is one that you actually use. If you actually have one that you're using daily, weekly, that fits into your process, that's better than 80% of the businesses out there. If you have this fancy template that you used once and then didn't use for another month and then hope for the best, which is where a lot of people end up, understandably so, then it's not a good template. So that's kind of the discipline, and the right tool for the right stage is probably the most important thing. And yeah.
Well, fully
Cool.
agreed on that one. I think, early on we got too fancy with it, and we just couldn't update it, and we had to get external help to update our models. But now we have the capabilities internally to just, update and roll it forward weekly.
And on that, like we have early stage businesses on Highbeam that use our 13-week cash flow planner to just operationally run the business. And it's not always ideal, and there's always edge cases that might be better if they did it themselves, but it's better than a lot of times what they would have to build themselves or run themselves. And that's just part of the Highbeam platform. And so for less than 5 million of sales, maybe even, like that's usually a perfectly valid way to run the operations of the business. And you can kind of keep that updated, and we will update it as part of that. And we export that in Google Sheets. So it's a live Google Sheet that's usable. There's other ways people can do it with, outsourced controllers or fractional CFOs or other kind of partners that do this. But I do think that at some point that's an investment in the operations of the business that's essential if you're going to raise funding or actually run the business kind of successfully. Cool. Let me move on, and I'll go through this a little bit. So I think we've already talked a bit about balancing profit and expansion and why that's important. I think the bottom part here, which is interesting, is that a lot of times we're told that the only metric that matters is growth and sales growth. And that's kind of built into us because that's the vanity metric everyone talks about. And you ask a brand, like, how much you do in sales? And that's how you generate how valuable the brand is. I think that that's my point of view, is that's actually changed, and the best investors and operators care less about that after a certain stage. Like you could have a $10 million sales brand, two brands with the same sales that are valued completely differently, because one is profitable and it's free cash flow, and one is burning cash. And the $10 million brand that's profitable, and it could be worth, I don't know, $30 million, and the 10 million brand that's worth, $2 million if it's like capital intensive and not actually generating. So it's this top line sales number as the only metric that matters, and growth solely for growth's sake. It's important to show that people want your product, and early on that might be important, but I think very quickly that changes now to people caring about, well, tell me about the profitability, tell me about your cash flow management, and that's the stuff that really matters. And I don't know, Alan, maybe you have a point of view also on like how this shifted for you, because I know you've done a lot of work on thinking about profitability and cash flow and not just sales. So maybe you want to talk about that?
And so going back to the point of like looking at the business from top down. So For those that don't know, Moon Brew was formerly known as Noon Brew. We launched a company as Noon Brew, which was a coffee alternative. We were operating two separate brands. And so earlier this year in January, we decided, hey, we need to have focus. We need to have a very clear why behind our brand. And I think that shift helped us essentially focus on the right things to get us to profitability on that side. So as we were kind of like getting to that first 10 million in sales, we kept tripping over ourselves because we didn't quite know where to put the focus into. But the moment that we realized as a brand, sleep is our product. That is a marketplace that we play in. That's when we really found that focus to essentially push and we're able to find expansion and profit within that.
Right. So part of this on how do you achieve sustainable growth? It's important to kind of like pick and choose where you're investing. So I think that sometimes there's the everyone wants to do everything all at once, and most brand founders and most founders in general are optimists, right? We all believe in ourselves, we all believe in our brands, and that's why we started these companies. And that's amazing. And that's the energy that we need to have to make things into existence. But I think there's this kind of like optimism and reality balance that has to be around what are the one or two or three things that you can afford to do. And I think you have to be clear about that, because at the end of the day, where reality hits is in your bank account. Like, how much cash do you actually have on a given day to spend on stuff? And that's all the reality that matters. Everything else is, in the future and dreams, but the reality is the cash in your bank account. And so I think having a point of view that says, what can I do, but how does that line up to the reality of how much I have to spend? And if that means you have to go fundraise a certain amount, go do that. But like, balance the demand for your cash with the supply for your cash, but bring it back to cash. That's probably the most important thing. And then you have to allocate all your things you could invest in, prioritize them, put them in your cash flow planner, but think about them with the lens of, do I have enough cash and what do I have to do to make that happen? Because without that, you might end up with things you're excited about, but like we talk to brands all the time, like, I want to open a store. That's a great idea. I've gotten a certain size. I want to do it. And you're like, okay, now that's going to take you $400,000 to go, but I'm cash flow positive. I have all these things like, but you don't have $400,000 in the cash. Well, I'll take a loan. Okay. So now you're talking about, don't have the cash. I need to go take a loan. I'm going to map it. It's the right set of conversations. And then a lot of times they'll look at the math and say, maybe not right now, maybe 6 months from now, maybe a year from now. And that might be the right decision. So it's more about making sure all your investments tie back to, do I have the cash? And if not, how can I get the cash? And then prioritizing those investments accordingly.
And I think
Um,
also, like, for
but
new brands, you might just assume you need to spend on a lot of this stuff in different ways. It can be really helpful to talk to people who have done it before. Looking back on my experience as an entrepreneur in this area, man, like the amount of money we spent on marketing that we absolutely did not need for a lot of reasons. One, we're like, well, of course, yeah, you have to like, pay an agency and build up your Instagram following, like paying a retainer and direct ads. But we were retail focused. That's where the volume was. And just looking back on that money, the number of times a buyer actually asked me how many followers we had on Instagram is zero. And it's just like, oh God, if I had that money back. And then I think the other thing was like, you're going to change things about your product also. And so, the marketing expense, like you might rationalize some of your product line early on, and all that money then is pretty much gone that you spent on the marketing. So I think just like really taking a hard look at every one of these expenses and not assuming any of it is actually necessary, just like having very like clarity of vision. What is our growth strategy? Thus, what expenses will have high ROI to support that?
That's
Alan,
a
how did you waste a lot of money on anything, Alan?
we have, but we've learned from that. I mean, we're very performance oriented. I think everyone over here is going to be dependent on advertisements at one point. And so, from that perspective, even something as simple as PR, where it sounds amazing to be on Forbes and things like that, but for us, we took a very strategic approach, given in the past we've lost a lot of money investing in certain things before we were ready for it. And so as a brand, we thought about, what can get us to the point where we can invest into PR. And that came with months and months of good performance, profitable months. We rolled that into kind of, now we're thinking about PR today. And it's essentially like, you have to get the brand ready in different stages. Even if you get PR too early, no one is still gonna, see you online in that way. You have to, build up certain platforms, your brand platform, before you invest in PR. And then more and more people, it creates a snowball effect from there. So I absolutely agree. There's an ROI to every investment.
I'm so glad you said that about PR. Oh, again, more shivers down my spine. Like we were just like, yeah, and then we do PR and everybody hears about the brand. We're paying this ridiculous retainer and it gets nothing because the product's not available anywhere yet, like, yeah. And then the same is true with like, oh, we'll do a billboard. Like, oh, do you have a ton of stores right near that billboard where people could buy it? And like, you have good velocity? Like, no, like, oh God.
Someone just asked a question about packaging, I'm guessing in terms of like resource allocation. I think as an early brand, you're still optimizing your product. You're still trying to find the right messaging on there. And so if you're working with a co-man, if you're figuring out production where you can get low MOQs, that's probably the best play. First and foremost, you always want to have flexibility to update and keep rolling out revisions to your product until you get that perfect product fit.
And, just reminds me, Alan, of like, we are working with a different brand founder, and the exercise we went through there was, okay, list all the 10 things that you're most excited about that you want to go do. Okay, fine. We listed them. And a lot of the things were like things like this. I want to open a new store. I have this PR campaign. I want to launch this new product. I'm like, okay, great. Now, how much do you think these are going to cost? And I was like, numbers here. And okay, now let's put down how much cash this is going to generate. And they're like, oh, I was going to do this. Like, okay, put the timing for when that cash is going to show up. Like, well, okay, maybe you're from, I don't know, really, I don't know, blah, blah, blah. And then you look at that mix and you say, like, okay, it doesn't mean you can't do any of this, but you can afford to do 3 of these. So let's just build the plan, put it all down and see which 3 can you do that. I said, now let's look at the stuff you're least excited about, which is like how much are you spending on shipping or how much your discounts have done or whatever this is. Like, yeah, okay, I've put it off, but here's the 5 things. Like, how much cash could this generate if you improved your discounting by 3% or increased your pricing by 2%? All the stuff that no one wants to do, that's not that fun. But then you look at the cash impact and you're like, shoot, that's X hundred thousands of dollars. And that's the discipline to have the mix of the exciting things, but also the things that actually drive cash performance, which are the non-exciting things around, pricing and discounting and packaging or marketing efficiency and all these things that start adding up, or like, employee spend. And that's the stuff that over time, if you don't have a system to manage that, they just start expanding out of like reach. And then you're like, I feel helpless. So part of that's just setting up the system from the start to be able to do that.
And on the flip side of that, right? It's like with the right systems, you're looking at all the right things, the core fundamentals of the business. So it's like, how can I optimize my fulfillment time, or how can I optimize the shipping rates that I'm currently getting per shipping label? That actually compounds into profitability where you are able to invest in more of these fun things, these more glamorous things. And so that's the right way to look at it.
All right. So we've touched on a lot of these, but maybe Alan, from your standpoint, couple of tips for people at the early stage of the journey about what you've learned and maybe what things maybe not intuitive about what made Moon Brew as successful as. And maybe you can talk a bit about like what are your current, if to the degree you're comfortable sharing, the current sales projections and growth you've seen in the last couple of years, because I think it is quite a compelling story.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll touch upon that first. I mean, we started the year at essentially a 3 million run rate. We're currently at a 23 million run rate within, 7 months. So we've been scaling quite fast on this side, which, brings up all these different points over here. But I think it all begins with a really good team. I think, you want to hire A players always. You want to make sure that you lead with context as a leader and allow the people that are going to make an impact to go make an impact. Once you have a really good team built into place, and for the earlier founders, it's like really just figuring out swim lanes and working together. If you're a solo founder, it's like understanding what are the most important things that we have to get done. From there, align across the core functions. And so if you're a solo founder, I will first kind of work backwards in terms of like, what is the product market fit for us? And then how do we define that? How does CAC play into that story? How much ad spend can we invest into these platforms, which goes into that 13-week cash flow model, the forecasting that we talked about a little bit, which helps you get a projection and a view on the business itself. Once you're acquiring customers, I would set up an NPS platform. It's to understand, where the customers are seeing lapses in their experience and their journey with the business. And as you're kind of going through and you're adding more cohorts, that's when your LTV comes into play. You'll start to understand what's the life cycle of my customer base essentially. And you really want to get into this CAC to LTV calculation like it's a religion, right? So it's like as your LTV moves up, your CAC moves also. Like you're able to spend more money to acquire more customers. Someone just asked a question, what is an NPS platform? So we use a company called Cervicate. NPS, for those that don't know, it's called a net promoter score. So it's your promoters minus your neutrals and your detractors. But within that, it's a simple question. It's like, would you recommend this company to a friend? And you obviously want to be in the positives as far as NPS scores, but it'll give you insights as to where you're missing as a company. Is it the product? Is it the flavor? Is it the efficacy, shipping speed, customer service? They'll let you know. And that's where you want to get those fundamentals right before you start pushing into the more glamorous things like a billboard or like a retail store and things like that. We want to reward good CACs and punish bad CACs. And so what that means is that, when Meta is giving us really poor CACs from a long period, we're essentially pulling back ad spend. It's all algorithm driven. And we believe that in a world, if we're telling Meta we're okay with getting a call it $100 CAC, Meta's going to keep giving us that. But the moment that we pull it back and rebuild, that's when we start to see better performance. But that all begins with a really strong creative pipeline too. So I think that's one of those things that you need to have a good discipline of, especially if you're going to be running a lot of advertisements, is to create a creative flywheel where you have fresh creatives, iteration on creatives, where you can flush it through the system and, try to drive down those CACs as much as possible. And then lastly, I think as you're scaling, what you want to focus on essentially is the balance between inventory and ad spend. And that goes back to the earlier few points that we talked about at the beginning of this conversation is essentially like, if I'm pushing ad spend 20% week over week, am I able to sustain that as far as inventory? How do my lead times look? And then most importantly, like how much cash do I need to do that with? And can I do that?
And I'll add just because, this would be more of a direct to consumer e-commerce focused thing that's like amazing if you can grow that way and be profitable. A lot of brands are more retail focused. If you're looking at it that way, like think of the customers like the retail accounts that you're talking about, and they vary greatly in terms of their costs and the value, right? The cost being the slotting that you're going to have to pay to get in there, the annual promo fees and ads and all this bullshit that they ask you for and displays they strong arm you into, with then the lifetime value in that case is going to be what's the velocity that you can expect, and how long are they going to keep you on shelf even if you do it. And so I would say to anybody, it's good to do your research. And if you want to see, like, you can look at our list of all the retail chains that are out there, the retail sales tracker that we released, it's every single chain out there, and look at tips for which ones are better on slotting and that kind of stuff. So like, some are like Albertsons, Safeway. Boy, like I hope you got a lot of money in the bank for something like that, because it's going to be a very high cost and a low lifetime value because they have like low velocity in the stores and very high costs, right? But there are other ones like Fresh Time Market that maybe they don't even charge you slotting, and you can get some good stuff going. So I think same principle applies.
I think that's also a great tip as far as like retail and like velocity of sell through. Like we're not in retail just yet. I think for us, we're still figuring out the right brand messaging for us because if you're targeting a bigger retailer like Ralph's, Walgreens, Target, you want to enable a lot of organic sell through just because the impression based advertisements that you have to run to drive the sell through get very expensive, and so you want to create organic sell through in a way which comes with an optimized product and optimized product packaging.
And just to add to that, I think I'd love to claim that every Highbeam customer gets the results that everyone gets, but this is definitely all on Alan and the Moon Brew team. But jokes aside, I think that you'll notice that one, I think it's incredibly hard to scale as quickly as that. But second, it's the focus on the drivers of the business and the metrics to understand what to do and when to do it. And so to the point around whether you're thinking of, meta advertising or account level kind of value and determination, it's like you have to know what are the core drivers for your business, and then how do you change or adapt those so that you feel comfortable that you're scaling in the mode that you want to. Otherwise, you end up in a mode where you run out of cash very quickly. Like if you scale with CACs that are unsustainable, you're going to end up running out of cash very quickly. And then you can't really fund that. No one, that's really hard place to be. Or if you went wholesale to retail and you went to 10 accounts that are now overdue, not profitable, and you're stuck with them, it's a very tough place to be. So you have to kind of really understand that and build a system to make sure that you understand the drivers of the business. And maybe one thing you mentioned, Alan, that I think is super interesting in your journey, like you mentioned a bit about the change from Noon Brew to Moon Brew. Now that's a big shift for someone to say, I'm going to change the name of the company and change. I'm curious about what part of your system allowed you to identify the fact that, wait a minute, we're actually going to change the name of the company and change the hero product because something told us that that's the right thing to do. Like what was that inflection point?
That came straight down to CAC to LTV. I mean, I think for us, when we had two brands, we were marketing the afternoon energy, the coffee alternative, we were marketing the nighttime sleep aid, but we realized that, Meta was giving us far better metrics. Someone just asked a question, how do you calculate CAC? I mean, it can be as simple as total ad spend over new customers, to give you a CAC number. But that's exactly what gave us the confidence to go into that. And so we went further into testing. What happens if it's just a Moon Brew only funnel? What happens if we just divert all of our spend over there? And the performance spoke for itself. And over time, as we grew the cohorts a bit more, we saw that essentially the cohorts for a nighttime sleep aid is far more stickier, versus a coffee alternative that's a powder base, where a lot of people are expecting ready to drink and just convenience factors. And so the occasion also spoke to that and gave us confidence in the thesis to move over. And we actually made the switch February 1st. Our website officially transferred over about a month ago. And so things have been going well. I think it all begins with the metrics, depending on how you acquire a customer.
And just to add to that, I think that the really interesting thing to me about that is sales in some ways can be a lagging indicator, right? Like your sales are the driver is like you're investing in advertising or you're doing activities and kind of you're seeing the sales. But Alan had a system that allowed him to see early on the drivers and the engine and the fundamentals on the sustainable kind of profitable growth part of it was better for this product and this product. And then you make the decision to say like, oh, wait a minute, I'm going to invest and change in this. And then so you had a kind of an alerting system because the system was in place. And I guess I'm coming full circle here, that you need to have some sort of system from very early on that allows you to make those decisions. Because right now you have the most degrees of flexibility. Like you have an idea on what might work, but you don't know. And I think that the more that you can launch and learn as you get data in on what's working and not working, which accounts are working, what products are working, and the more you can change, the better it's going to be for the business as a whole, but also for the ability to sustain and fund the business. And so it doesn't have to be super complicated, but a simple system set up to do that, I think, is the best operators we see all have that, and they had that relatively early on. And so, sometimes people delay that to say, oh, I'm going to wait till I have X million of sales to do that. And usually then you're not getting the signal to be able to adapt quickly, because the businesses that fail a lot of times because they stuck with the same thing for too long and they were getting the signal that might not be working, or they have to tweak something, but they just didn't do it. And I think that's important to have that discipline to do that. And I see that in a lot of our successful brand founders, that they have these moments where they're like, oh, we made this tough decision. We shut down wholesale, or we changed the name of the company, or we moved this product. And you need to have a system that can give you the data to make those decisions. I don't know, Alan, if that seems to resonate.
Absolutely. I mean, the housekeeping stuff is very important. I think, like, the first thing we did when our marketing team was brought on was essentially, connect all the data streams. So we use Supermetrics, pulls all of our data together into a dashboard that we created internally. That way we can look at essentially our CACs every day, our returning customers and everything like that, which helps inform the rest of our decisions. But someone mentioned, it's a very data-driven process, and you have to understand it in order to build the right foundations, but scalable processes that you could take to the next level. What we've seen in the early days is that, the systems that we built, they would break at every level. So we would have an internal saying, new levels, new devils. But now we're building a lot more scalable solutions and systems where we can keep pushing it, and these systems just keep following with us.
And I'll at the end, I'll try to talk a little bit about, even early on, what systems you can put in place and what we've seen companies do. And it can be a little bit overwhelming, I think, to otherwise think about everything you have to put in at the stage that Alan's at, but we're happy to talk a bit about like what we've seen early on that you can put in place as well. So let me keep moving. So I think we've talked about this already, but the role of cash flow and growth is super important because obviously it's the cash conversion cycle that all of these businesses and all of us kind of are so aware of, which is you're spending on marketing and inventory ahead of sales, and then you're getting money from, retailers or from Shopify or wherever else is processing, and that's the engine that's going to scale. So if that engine isn't working well, it's not going to be able to scale. So fix the cash conversion cycle. Second is maintaining liquidity. Every business goes through ups and downs, and you need to make sure, hard as it is that there's a buffer and a partner that you can maintain that kind of trough when you have that. It's bound to happen. And what's interesting is like, and maybe Alan can speak to this, sometimes growth can drive the biggest problems in liquidity. So you think you're having a great month and you're like, things are going amazing. But that's the time where it's the hardest to maintain cash because it's liquidity. And maybe you could talk a bit about how there's this kind of dichotomy where you might think sales are amazing. That's going to drive bigger problems in cash planning than if it was the opposite. Sometimes, sales flat is easier to manage than sales growing. So I don't know if you have a point of view of that.
That brings back some PTSD. I think early on when we launched the company as Moon Brew, we essentially had one good ad. It propelled the business really. It really killed it. And we based off of like that quarter's worth of performance, we made some very big decisions on inventory buys. We kept stepping on it as far as ad spend. So we purchased a lot of inventory up front. And when the payment terms came up, when our bills to Meta were due, we were just like, oh crap, like we don't have enough cash to pay for all this. And then we had to go seek working capital partnerships. Those were the old days of operating. I mean, they were some tough lessons to swallow, but it ultimately made us better operators. So I think it was a blessing in disguise that we went through that. But I think this goes back to show it's like the systems and processes. It's like make sure you get that right. Don't anchor too much. Off of like a month or two's worth of performance. Like, lever it up, scenario play it out, but don't make crazy decisions based off of that until you have
And
full confidence.
Alan, I think also it's a good point that like sometimes like the wormhole opens and there's a huge opportunity. And also if you don't have the planning there, you might not be able to step on the gas. And if you don't do it then that thing might be gone forever, right? Like if you had the money lined up already, you could have gone in even deeper and like then all of the Apple rules change and like now you can't get the same ROI, right? When you like it's good to have the reserves in a place where they are for when you just like, this is my moment, we gotta go.
Yeah, and those moments will come, at different stages. You'll always spot different opportunities. But even then, it's like, one of the things that I will share as far as the top 5 takeaways in a future slide is essentially like be comfortable with staying still for a second. Let the dust settle, even though you feel like there's a really good opportunity to push on it. For us, it's like last month, we had a really good month. We try to step on it some more, but we realize if we push any further from here, we won't have any more inventory for another month or so. So we have to be okay with staying at this level, let it all play out, let our inventory restock itself, and then we'll push again.
And one thing in the comments about the payback on the CAC, I think that's a really valid point, is this goes back to kind of there's accounting based profitability and then there's cash in your bank account. And both are important because one's the engine, the design of it, but like, when do you actually get the money back from having the sale made when you did the sale? And, there's lots of hopes built into balance sheets and P&L that I see. And then the reality is the bank account, right? And so there's being disciplined about what is the outlay going to actually come back into the bank account. And that's sometimes more complicated in retail than it is in D2C land. But I think keeping an eye on that is super, super important. And then one thing mentioned there that I'll just say is that I love this idea of like being open to the opportunity when it does arise. Because, we had a brand we work with, and I'm sure everyone minds sharing this, but Taylor Swift walked into his store and bought a hat. And for the next, 6 months or whatever, they were sold out of hats. And he had like, anything he could do to get the hat production up and running. And he had good deal relationship with suppliers and he had the funding and he was working on there's a bunch of stuff that happened there, but he didn't know that was going to happen. But like, if it happens, what he has to do is also know that like this, how do I ride this? My hat sales are not going to stay this high forever, but I have this moment now that I need to take advantage of. And it's like having a flexibility to do that, I think is definitely key. So cool. So we'll talk a bit more about this maybe when it comes to, I know we're coming up on time when Alan's, so I'm not going to go when it comes to Alan's specific tips, but in terms of as you scale the business, 2 or 3 things that we've seen that are kind of important ways to make sure you manage your cash, which probably won't come as a surprise to anyone, is like inventory management. Like it's really key to be at the right level. Don't buy too much because then you have money caught there. Don't buy too little. Easier said than done, but you have to put the time and effort into it, I think, to manage that, because there's no shortcuts here. Without this, it's really, really tough. Payment term negotiation. Again, it's tough when you're small because suppliers, it's hard to get terms with them, et cetera. But there's ways to do it. You can do it through other brands. You can do it, and we're happy to talk maybe offline on how we've seen other people do it, but there are ways to get supplier terms, and if you don't ask, you don't get. But this is the cheapest form of funding you'll get. For the most part, the cheapest form of funding you get is supplier terms. And then lastly, move money effectively. So one of the things we talk about at Highbeam a lot is the velocity of movement of cash and the cost and friction of movement of cash. Like you take a $10 million business, that means $10 million came in and probably 9.5 went out, or whatever it might be. That's 20 million flow through, making sure that's efficient and you earn the yield while it's there and that you don't pay too many fees to have it move through. It's important, and that compounds over time. Tools and techniques for cash flow management, then I'll move to Alan's takeaways. We've talked a bit about this, like real-time cash flow monitoring. I think that a system that as close to as possible lets you know where you are with your cash in and cash out and you manage to it. We're big believers in, as much as possible, having it all in one place. If you have 7 different systems to move cash, it's just hard to keep track of, and you don't know where the cash is sitting, and you have like a bill pay system, a banking system, a credit card system. You got 7 things going on. It's just hard to manage, and usually the complexity is not worth it. And then last, like as much as possible, work with people that understand your business. Any of your partners that understand how it works and how important it is that, hey, my credit card can't get shut off because my Meta ads get shut off because that kills me on Black Friday. And therefore, even if I hit my limit, I need you to figure out how to invest more in here. Like it's just important that your partners understand the business and the needs that you're driving. So with that, I'm going to go quickly, Alan. Yeah, top 5 takeaways that you had.
We've already talked a lot about these, but happy to run through them. I think strong team as it comes to you, right? Like, as you're scaling the business, don't be afraid to make the investments into talent. I think that's the backbone of our business. Without our team members, I don't think we'd be here today. But make sure you find people that'll push back on you. Don't get any yes players in the team, because you want a little bit of diversity within the thinking. And only bring on A talent, right? And let go of the ones that aren't A players, even as painful as it is, and create a culture of feedback. You want your most junior member to come up to you and give you feedback when you're not doing your best. And I think that's very important within that. There's a really good book, No Rules Rules, which is by Reed Hastings of Netflix, that talks about culture and how to kind of build something like this. Back to kind of like the financials, in terms of like P&L, own and understand your P&L very well. So that goes into like just understanding where your cost comes from, where you're spending a lot of money on, because as you're just spending money, like it just comes and goes out of your bank account. Sometimes you're just like, what's another subscription for $100 for this platform in the background? We cut those things out ASAP as soon as we're not using it, just to preserve as much cash. Any dollar you save on OpEx or SG&A goes back into marketing. The third one is, and this is a favorite one of mine, is failure is only relevant if it's catastrophic. So, don't be shy to take tests and take some swings. It only doesn't work when, you run out of money. So take very calculated risks when it comes to like testing. You need to test in order to figure out what works within your business. And then the fourth one is tight partnerships between ops, marketing. I'll add finance in there too. Within that, I think demand forecasting is so tough. You can never get it right. There will be moments you're sold out. There will be moments where you have slightly overstock, but form a really good tight knit partnership between operations, marketing, and finance, so that the business just keeps growing. And then lastly, while we're all here, I mean, cash is king. Always make sure you have enough runway in the business. If you're really pushing the envelope and you're flying close to the sun, make sure you have enough to cover payroll. I think that's a good rule of thumb for at least a few months. But if you're waiting for CACs to pay back and things like that, it's like you just need to make sure that you get that part right, because one miscalculation over there could be detrimental to your business.
I love these. I think these are incredibly relevant for me. All of them resonate for sure, Alan. Thank you. I also, so Samir, I'd asked if you can obviously you guys do a lot of the stuff around the cash flow planning and all that. If maybe Samir, if you could show a couple, like a quick demo of how your
Yeah, I would
guys'
love to. And
platform
I know we're
works,
coming up on time. Is it okay if we go a couple of minutes on that or a minute or so on
please.
that? Okay, perfect. So I'll just quickly go through this and then do the demo. So I think it's all what we've talked about, which is like, you know, put as much effort into cash planning as Lisa's doing into sales. We'll talk a bit about how we could do that. Design your capital stack. So this goes to funding. Like, think through and talk to experts if you can on, like, given my stage of growth, what's the best funding options and what are those people looking for, all the way from equity investors to debt investors, and just know the pros and cons. And that the last is find the right cash planning partner. Like, if you're not doing it yourself, find someone that can help you do this. And there's very low cost ways, like a template online all the way through. There's a good segue to talk a bit about what Highbeam does. So what I'll do here is, let me stop sharing for a second and I'll just bring up my demo tool, and not to make this too self-serving with regards to Highbeam, but basically, give me 1 second. So one thing we do, and let me show my screen again. Can you guys see this?
Yep.
So this is a demo account for Highbeam. As I said, we're a banking platform that allows you to move money in and out as effectively. On the banking side, of course, we try to maximize the amount of yield and make that as automated as possible by checking yield, et cetera. But for the purpose of this conversation, I think what's interesting is what we try to do is in Highbeam, you can connect all of your accounting software and any cards or other things you might use. And then what we try to do is we collect all that information, categorize it, and then build out cash flow planning tools. So some of those tools can be in the app, but more and more what we find most useful, and this is a demo, for example, of a cash planner. This is a live view that Highbeam generated. So this would update every day, and this would have all of your cash in, where it came from, all of your cash out, where it went. And this view basically allows you to go in and say, like, okay, Highbeam, you said this forecast, that's actually wrong because I have a sale going. I'm going to put this manually in, and then afterwards you can go and override it. The main benefit here is that this may not be exactly precisely what you need, but the benefit is it's automated, always live, and actually usable. So a lot of times we'll work with customers to say, how can we help you set this up so that Highbeam will automate the generation of the cash flow planning? And then you can take this and use it and run with it. And so people will build monthly views off this. You can do spend management, you can do capital planning, demand planning. And so this is a large part of what the benefit we view, at least, as if you worked with a banking partner that really understands your business, can they give you tools that actually help you run the business? And that's, they're happy to share more, and we'll maybe get some information out, but that's, especially as you start to get real cash in and cash out, something like this, I think, is super important to be able to run your business effectively. And this comes to kind of like a large part of the problem people have sometimes is the manual updates to keep this current and keep this live and keep this usable. And that is the part that we're trying to automate. Now, of course, we work well with, I'll stop sharing there, but we work well with financial planners and partners that use Highbeam. And so a lot of controllers and accounting firms and fractional CFOs partner with Highbeam to give this, or we work with brands directly as well. So that's kind of the gist of what we do.
Samir, what's the best way for people who are interested to check it out, to talk to your team, get a demo?
Yeah, that'd be great. So you can always reach out to me directly, Samir, Samir, at highbeam.co. I think we'll also, if possible, when we send this around, send through a referral link. We don't always work with smaller brands, but if, of course, the startup CPG community, we're happy to waive all minimums as well as give 3 months of the cash flow reporting away for free, just no commitment, of course, just to make sure that people can use it and see if it's valuable. And then we'll send that through. There's also highbeam.co is the website. So highbeam.co. And yeah, we'd love to. The reason we started the company was because we believe that cash planning is an essential part of growing and scaling successful businesses. And so I also personally always love talking to founders who've put the time and effort into building businesses. So I'd love to hear from, and however I can be helpful, happy to do so. Thanks you so much I know we're a little bit over time, so I really appreciate everyone joining us and taking the time. Thanks again to Alan for taking time out of his busy day to chat about things. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me. See you.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Samir. Thanks, Alan.
Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.